She meant to text her friend for a way out. A Korean Mafia boss replied, "Confirm address, I'm coming." Nia Robinson's breath came in shallow, jagged hitches as she pressed her back against the cold, unforgiving hallway wall. Her hand was clamped tight over her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to betray her position to the shadows moving outside. In the dim light, her eyes were wide, fixed on the cracked screen of her phone with a mixture of hope and pure, soul-chilling terror. She had been running for so long that her legs felt like lead, and the light sweater she wore offered no protection against the icy dread pooling in her stomach. Just minutes ago, the heavy thud of boots had echoed through the stairwell. The debt collectors had finally found her. They weren't there to talk, they were there to collect what her past had promised them, and they didn't care if she survived the transaction. With trembling fingers, Nia fumbled for her contacts, her vision blurring as she tried to find her best friend's name. "They're here, 402 Miller Street, apartment 4B. Please hurry," she typed, her thumb hovering over the send button for a heartbeat before pressing it with the last of her strength. She waited for the familiar name to appear at the top of the chat, but as the screen lit up with a reply, her heart performed a violent, sickening somersault. The number was unknown. The profile was a void. Miles away, in a room that smelled of expensive tobacco and old blood, Choi Dong-hyun stared at the message. He sat with an unhurried, terrifying grace, a cigarette smoldering in one hand and a heavy handgun resting casually near the other. He didn't know Nia Robinson, but he knew the sound of a woman standing on the edge of an abyss. His thumb traced the cold glass of his phone as he typed back 4 words that would dismantle her world and build a new one in its place. "Stay hidden. 5 minutes." Nia stared at the reply, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. She hadn't reached a friend, she had just invited a monster to the feast. The man in the doorway stepped into the kitchen, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the floor as he reached for Nia. She braced herself for the impact, her eyes squeezed shut, but the violence she expected was interrupted by a sound that didn't belong in the chaos of a dilapidated apartment. It was a series of 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the outer wall, not a plea for entry, but a rhythmic warning of what was already there. The man froze, his hand inches from Nia's sweater. The air in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a vacuum of absolute stillness. Then the remaining half of the front door didn't just break, it simply ceased to be a barrier. There was no dramatic crash or splintering wood. Instead, the frame was dismantled with such surgical precision that the door was set aside like it had never mattered at all. Men moved through the opening like shadows given form, dressed in black tactical gear that seemed to swallow the dim hallway light. They didn't shout, they didn't rush. They filled the room with a silent, terrifying efficiency, creating a wall of stillness that forced Nia's tormentor to scramble backward, his bravado evaporating into a panicked wheeze. Then Choi Dong-hyun walked in. He didn't hurry, moving through the debris of Nia's life with the unhurried grace of a predator who knew the world would wait for him. His dark suit was immaculate, a stark contrast to the grime of the apartment, and he held a smoldering cigarette in one hand with a calm that was more frightening than any shout. His eyes were obsidian, flat and empty of everything except a terrible, patient focus that settled on the intruder like a stain on expensive marble. The man who had been hunting Nia fumbled for a weapon, his voice cracking as he tried to reassert his power. Dong-hyun didn't even look at the weapon. He simply took a final drag of his cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the darkness. "You are in the way," he said, his voice quiet and conversational, yet carrying the weight of an inevitable sentence. Before Naya could even blink, the tactical shadows moved. There was a sound, wet, organic, and final, and the intruder was discarded as if he were nothing more than a distasteful thought. Dong-hun turned to Naya, the cold emptiness in his eyes gaining a new, predatory dimension as he looked at her. He reached down, sliding his arm beneath her with a strength that made her feel as though she weighed nothing at all. As he lifted her from the floor, the scent of cedar, tobacco, and something darker, perhaps gunpowder, surrounded her. "You're mine now," he whispered, a statement of fact that felt like both a sanctuary and a cage. Naya woke to sunlight that shouldn't exist. Not the gray, filtered light of her cramped apartment, but a pure, unobstructed morning pouring through floor-to-ceiling glass that stretched impossibly high. She blinked against the brightness, her mind struggling to reconcile the last thing she remembered, the terrifying scent of tobacco and gunpowder in Dong-hyan's arms, with the palace she had woken up in. It was a temple of wealth suspended in the sky, 40 floors up, maybe more, where the city below looked like distant, shimmering rivers of light. The bed beneath her was a cloud of silk sheets the color of champagne, and her body protested in a dozen places that had nothing to do with her recent escape. As she sat up slowly, testing her legs, her feet met heated marble. It was then she realized she was wearing silk pajamas she'd never seen before. Black, perfectly fitted, and soft against her skin. Someone had changed her clothes while she slept. The intimacy of that violation should have terrified her, but it was swallowed by a larger, more pressing question. Where the hell was she? She found a door of black lacquered wood that slid open with a whisper, revealing a hallway that belonged in an architectural magazine. Following the faint sound of falling water, she emerged into a living space that stole what was left of her breath. The penthouse was a masterclass in monochrome elegance, filled with low-slung leather furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than her entire life. But it was the 360-degree panorama of the city waking up beneath her that held her captive. Beautiful, isn't it? Naya spun around to find a man standing near the entrance, his face professionally blank, but his broad-shouldered frame blocking the only visible exit. "I need to leave," she said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Miss Robinson," the guard replied, his tone polite yet absolute. The absence of her past and the weight of her new surroundings felt like freedom and imprisonment braided together. She was safe from the shadows of her hallway, but she was now trapped in a gilded cage of glass and steel. The realization settled over her with the soft, inexorable pressure of silk tightening into a noose. She had escaped one monster by running straight into the arms of something infinitely more dangerous, and the most terrifying part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to run anymore. Nia didn't have to wait long for the cage to open. The glass door to the balcony slid aside, and Choi Dong-hyan stepped into the living area, a glass of tea in his hand. He had traded his tactical armor for charcoal slacks and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with muscle and decorated with ink that disappeared beneath the fabric. He looked less like a businessman now and more like what he truly was: dangerous. "You should be sitting," he said, his obsidian eyes tracking her with an unnerving focus that made her heart perform a complicated acrobatics routine. "I want to go home," Nia insisted, though the words felt hollow in the face of such absolute luxury. "You don't have a home," Dong-hyan replied, his voice precise and controlled as he set his tea down. He moved toward the window, his silhouette dark against the sprawling city below. "The man who came for you yesterday, the one you call a debt collector, is already back on the street. His associates in the precinct filed the incident as a minor dispute. No charges were laid." The room seemed to tilt beneath Nia's feet. "That's not possible. You saw what he was doing." "It is not only possible, it is done. He is looking for you right now." Dong-hyun turned back to face her, the morning light making him look as though he were carved from shadow. He has access to every camera, every database, and every corrupt tool this city has to offer. Outside these walls, you are a dead woman. He will find you, and when he does, he will not kill you quickly. Nia sank into a nearby leather chair, the butter-soft material mocking her terror. The reality of her situation settled over her like a suffocating weight. She had traded a predator in a hallway for a king in a tower, but the world outside remained a graveyard. In here, you are protected, Dong-hyun continued, moving closer until the scent of cedar and tobacco surrounded her once more. In here, you are untouchable, but there is a price for such sanctuary. He spread his hands in a gesture that was almost magnanimous. Outside, you are prey. In here, you are mine. Choose, Nia. Which do you prefer? Nia looked at the beautiful, terrifying man who had rearranged the pieces of her life. The trap was closing with the soft, inexorable pressure of silk tightening into a noose. She wasn't sure she wanted to root anymore, and that terrified her most of all. 3 days passed in the glass tower, and Nia learned that luxury could be its own kind of prison. She had explored every inch of the penthouse, from the library with its first editions to the gym she didn't know how to use, but every exit remained a silent, immovable barrier. On the 4th morning, Dong-hyun approached her with a quiet command. He led her through a corridor she hadn't yet discovered, stopping at a door that looked like all the others, but wasn't. When the door slid open, the air left Nia's lungs. The room was soundproofed, lined with specialized panels, and in the center, bathed in a soft, focused light, stood her cello. It wasn't just a similar model, it was hers, the instrument she had saved for years to buy, complete with a small, familiar scratch on the neck. "How?" she whispered, her voice failing as she moved toward it in a trance. "I went back," Dong-hyun said, leaning against the doorframe and watching her with that unnerving obsidian focus. "My men retrieved everything that mattered before your pasts could destroy it." Nia's fingers traced the familiar curves of the wood. "Why would you do this?" "Because 5 years ago, I saw you perform at the Sheridan Hall benefit." His voice dropped to a quiet, almost reverent register. "You played Elgar, the cello concerto in E minor. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds, I forgot what I was." Nia turned to stare at him, the weight of his words crashing over her. He remembered the piece, the emerald green dress she had worn, and the way she closed her eyes as if the music were the only thing in the world that mattered. "You're saying you've been obsessed with me for 5 years?" "Obsessed is your word," he said, moving closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I prefer devoted." He confessed to buying every recording and attending every public performance, noticing immediately when she stopped playing 2 years ago. He had looked into the why, finding the man who had crushed her spirit long before he ever threatened her life. The truth settled between them like a heavy, suffocating silk. This wasn't a rescue, it was a collection. "You're the masterpiece I've been waiting to acquire," he murmured, his fingers finally making contact as he traced the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "And now that I have you, I'm never letting go." Nia couldn't sleep. The penthouse was too quiet at night, with the glass and marble swallowing every sound until the silence itself became a presence. She spent hours staring at the ceiling of her gilded cage, replaying Dong-hyun's words about masterpieces and collections, feeling a dark and magnetic tension that made her skin feel too tight. At 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and wandered through corridors she had memorized, drawn by a pull that felt like a mixture of curiosity and self-destruction. That was when she heard his voice, low, controlled, and speaking in Korean with an authority that made her spine straighten. It came from an office behind a door that usually remained closed, but tonight it was cracked open just enough. Nia knew she should walk away, but her feet kept moving until she stood in the sliver of darkness beside the doorframe. Through the gap, she saw him. Dong-hyun sat behind a massive desk of dark wood, his face lit by the cold glow of multiple monitors. He had shed his usual armor. His suit jacket was gone and his sleeves were rolled up to reveal his tattooed forearms. But it wasn't his appearance that made Nia's blood run cold. It was his expression. Empty, absolute, the face of a man who had removed every trace of humanity and replaced it with pure, calculating purpose. On a screen, another man spoke, his face tight with fear masked as respect. Dong-hyun listened with the patience of a predator watching prey run out of places to hide. He spoke a few words of finality and moved his finger across a tablet with the casual efficiency of a man approving a lunch order. Except Nia knew in her bones he wasn't ordering food. He pulled up another screen of financial charts, and with a swipe of his hand, someone's life elsewhere on the world was being dismantled, asset by asset, carried out with the cold precision of a surgeon. This was the king of an empire built on fear and blood, destroying people with less emotion than a human showed swatting flies. Nia must have made a sound because he looked up, and for a frozen moment their eyes met across the darkness. In an instant, his face transformed. The emptiness evaporated, replaced by something warm and terrible and devastating. The monster disappeared, and in its place stood a man looking at her like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. The kiss was still a burning memory on Nia's lips when her new phone, the one Dong-hyun had given her as a supposedly safe lifeline, vibrated against the nightstand. She pulled away from him, her breath hitching as the screen lit up with an unknown number. Beneath it was a photo that turned her blood to ice. Julian, her younger brother, bound to a chair in a dark, hollow warehouse, his face bruised and his eyes wide with stark terror. Standing on the edge of the frame was the unmistakable silhouette of the man she had been running from. The message followed a second later. Come alone or he dies. 2 hours. Nia's world tilted as the phone slipped from her hand, though Dong-hyun caught it with liquid speed before it could hit the floor. He studied the screen, his expression shifting back into that terrible, calculated emptiness. No. His voice was flat and final. That's my brother! Nia lunged for the device, but he held it out of reach with insulting ease. I have to go. He has Julian. This is a trap, Dong-hyun replied, his voice a cold wall of logic. He explained that Julian was leverage. The moment the brother died, the enemy lost his only card. He wanted Nia to panic, to run back into the fire because she was terrified and not thinking clearly. Then what do I do? Nia's voice broke into a desperate, jagged sob. Just let my brother sit there waiting to die? No, Dong-hyun said, releasing her chin but not her wrist. You let me handle the extraction. My people are already moving. Mia yanked against his grip, but it was like fighting a steel cable. 2 weeks of terror, pain, and impossible desire finally crashed down, and she collapsed against his chest, sobbing until her tears ran dry and something harder took their place. She pulled back, wiping her face with a shaking hand. Teach me, she whispered, her eyes narrowing with a new dark resolve. Teach you what? Dong-hyun asked, though a flicker of approval crossed his face. Whatever it is you do, Nia said. I can't just be helpless. I can't just wait and hope anymore. If they come for me again, I need to be ready to end it. Dong-hyun studied her for a long moment, seeing the masterpiece finally begin to forge its own edge. Come with me, he said. Julian was returned unharmed 6 hours later, delivered to a safe house with the surgical precision only Dong-hyun's men could execute. But the threat remained, a lingering shadow that Dong-hyun proposed to flush out with a public trap. The Riverside Foundation's annual benefit, he had stated, his eyes holding that familiar, deciding intensity. He wanted to use Nia as a queen, making her first public appearance, knowing her former tormentors wouldn't be able to stay away. The days leading up to the gala were spent in the music room, where Nia relearned how to make her spirit and body cooperate. Dong Yan watched her practice in silence, conducting his empire from the corner of the room while she fought to reclaim her music. Sometimes she'd catch him staring, and the air would thicken with the unspoken acknowledgement of the transformation taking place. On the night before the event, Dong Yan came to her room with a garment bag. "Tomorrow you'll need armor," he said. Inside was a gown of deep crimson, the color of wine or dried roses or blood in low light. The liquid silk caught the light like water, featuring a neckline that bared her shoulders and a slit designed for movement. It was a weapon disguised as elegance. He produced a small black jewelry box containing a thin platinum chain with a single red stone. As he stepped behind her to fasten it, his breath was warm against her skin. "GPS tracker in the clasp," he explained softly, his presence overwhelming her in the intimate space. "Microphone in the stone. I'll hear everything." Nia turned to face him, the intensity in his obsidian eyes making her dizzy. "What if I freeze?" she whispered. "You won't," he murmured, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness. "Because you're not the woman who sent that text anymore. You're the woman who plays music like she's conjuring fire." He pulled her into a kiss that was slower and deeper than before, his hand sliding into her hair. When he pulled away, his voice was rough with a dark promise. "Tomorrow, you remind the world who you are, and then we finish this." The gala was a sea of excess and elegance, a swarm of people wearing wealth like a second skin. Nia arrived in Dong Hyun's car, the crimson dress clinging to her curves and her hair styled to expose the necklace that served as her silent sentinel. Cameras flashed as he helped her out, his hand possessive at the small of her back. "Smile," he whispered. "Show them you're untouchable." Backstage, Nia's hands shook as she rosined her bow, but it was anticipation, not stage fright. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dong Hyun. "He's here, back right corner." Peering through the curtain, she saw the collector who had haunted her, now disguised in a stolen security uniform, his smile confident and possessive. He thought she was still the terrified woman from the hallway, unaware that 3 weeks in a glass tower had forged her into something else. She walked onto the stage like she was walking into battle. The lights were blinding, but as the conductor raised his baton, Nia closed her eyes and began to play. The music was fire and fury, a channel for every buried grief and rage. She played as if the cello were a weapon and the notes were bullets. By the time the final note faded into thunderous applause, she saw the predator's smile vanish. She wasn't the prey anymore. She was the trap. The confrontation happened in the shadows of the dressing room corridor. When the collector lunged, Nia didn't scream. She used the training Dong Hyun had etched into her muscles. She spun into him, using his own momentum as leverage, and brought the small, deadly blade she'd concealed in the slit of her dress to his throat. "Give me one reason," she whispered, the blade drawing a thin line of red. Dong Hyun stepped into the hallway, not to stop her, but to finish the narrative. Behind him were the authorities and cameras he'd orchestrated to witness the collector's crimes. As the man was hauled away, Dong Hyun leaned in to deliver a final, silent promise that the prisoner would never reach the precinct. Later, in the quiet of the car, the news confirmed a tragic transport accident with no survivors. Nia felt a liberating wave of relief so powerful it made her lightheaded. Back at the penthouse, under the pouring rain, Dong Hyun offered her a ring of black diamonds and red stones. "I'm offering you empire and equality," he said. Nia looked at the man who had destroyed her ghosts to claim her and felt only certainty. "Yes," she said, her voice powerful and irrevocable. She stopped running and began to rule, a queen who had finally learned to love her monster. Join the inner circle at Hidden Heart Stories. Subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories right now to ensure you never miss a single drop of these ruthless tales. Hit the like button if Choi Dong-yun's brand of dark, absolute devotion is exactly what you've been looking for. Drop a comment below and let us know whose story you want to see next. Because in this world, every queen deserves her throne, and every monster deserves their muse. Welcome to Hidden Heart Stories, where happy endings are earned and justice always comes with the body.